Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto also gets the sealing knowledge along with his father's bloodline and gets a harem, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Minato Namikaze, Yondaime Hokage and Kuroi Senko of Konohagakure, stood pacing outside the delivery room for the news of his wife and child. He paced silently as his friend, Tsume Inuzuka, watched him. Tsume was the head of the Inuzuka clan and also a longtime friend of both Minato and Kushina Uzumaki, Minato's wife. She was currently pregnant with her second child, her current daughter being 4 years old, and was barely showing. She sighed as she watched Minato wear a hole in the floor and said, "Quit pacing. She's strong, just believe in her and wait already." Minato looked at his friend and sighed. "I'm sorry, I'm just anxious about the delivery," he replied. Tsume nodded her head, yes, but you're making me nervous. "You can't do anything at the moment so just sit and calm down for when you are needed," she replied. Minato went to open his mouth before the surgery light went off and both people turned to the door to see Tsunade of the Sannin walking out smiling brightly. "Well, the delivery was a success and you have a healthy baby boy, Minato. Congratulations. You can go to the maternity ward anytime," she said before she was twirled around anime style as Minato tore through the doors next to her and rushed to the maternity ward. Both women chuckled before joining him. Maternity ward. Kushina Uzumaki, the Red Death of Konoha, sat in a bed smiling brightly as she cradled her newborn son, Naruto. The name came from Jiraiya's book and the idea that the little bundle would be a maelstrom of activity if he was anything like his parents. Suddenly, the doors flew open and Minato froze as he stared at his newborn son. A smile crept its way onto his face before becoming what would soon be dubbed Naruto's prankster smile, and he walked over to his wife. He stroked her hair and kissed her head before she spoke. "Beautiful ain't he?" she asked. Minato nodded and said, "He may look like me but I'll bet he has your personality." Both of the parents chuckled at that. Tsunade and Tsume walked in and smiled brightly seeing their friends so happy. Unfortunately, it was not to last. An Anbu burst into the room. "Hokage-sama, the Kyuubi has been spotted heading this way. It will be here within the hour," he said. Minato swiftly rose and Kushina began to shake as she had an idea of what would happen. "Hold it off, keep it from the village whilst I figure out a way to stop it," Minato said before turning to Kushina. Kushina held her child fiercely and glared at her husband. "Absolutely not, Minato. You know as well as I what life Jinchuriki led. I will not subject my son to that horror," she said. Minato looked downcast and said, "I know that. However, with you here and Tsunade and Jiraiya, not to mention Tsume and our other friends, he won't live that life. You can prevent it and make sure he's the hero everyone should see him as." Kushina wavered for a second before shaking her head again. "No," she stated and glared at her husband who sighed before shining to his home. She looked to her friends. Tsume spoke. "Kushi-chan. What would you say to a marriage contract between my daughter and your son?" she asked. Kushina looked shocked. "What? You want our children to marry one another?" she asked. Tsume nodded. "It would be a good way to let little Naruto here not have to worry about finding love. You know that Inuzukas are fiercely loyal and if Hana consents when they are of age, then why not let the two of them have a chance, besides, it'll keep those civilians off your back," Tsume said with a smirk. The contract would let her be closer to her friends and would be mutually beneficial to both clans and parents. If it didn't work out, then nothing was lost as contracts allowed the couple to decline when they were to be wed. Kushina thought about it for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I agree. Tsunade, will you take care of the paperwork? I don't want to leave Naruto here," she said. The other women smiled and bowed before leaving the new mother and setting off to take care of the marriage contract. Tsunade looked at Tsume and said, You know Minato is going to wear her down, right? She asked. Sum nodded. That is one of the reasons for this contract. I will let my daughter know, and hopefully Hana can be someone precious to the boy. I just hope that this all works out, she said before they both disappeared in Shunshin's. With Minato, it had only been 20 minutes since he had spoken to Kushina, and he had already found the seals he needed to make his son a Jinchuriki. He didn't want to do it, but he firmly believed in his village, his friends, and, most of all, his wife. Besides that, Naruto was the only newborn in the village. He decided to give one last gift to Naruto before he left. He grabbed all his sealing books and large amounts of materials, with the Hiraishin notes and details among them, and separated them into several different sections before mass sealing them into a scroll with some blood on it. He gathered his things before taking one last look at his home. He sighed before sealing it one last time and taking a scroll he had made for the Sandaime when the sealing was done. Hopefully, everything would be just fine. Too bad no one ever told Minato that life is never fair. With Kushina and Naruto, Kushina was sitting in the hospital bed smiling happily at the little boy in her arms. She could already tell he would look like his father, and probably have a fanbase to boot. She held him gently but tensed when she felt the familiar buildup of chakra before a Shunshin. She looked up and sighed as she saw Minato once again stand before her, and he didn't look like he was playing around. Kushina-chan, he started. My answer is the same as before, Minato. I refuse to allow you to seal Kyuubi into Naruto. His life will be horrible no matter what we do, she said sternly while glaring at her husband. Naruto is the only child who was born. If there was anyone else, I wouldn't even ask. Besides, I have faith that this village will honor my dying wish and our friends will help him, he said. But, most of all, you will be there to care for him. Because I won't get that chance. Please, Kushina-chan, he begged. Kushina stared at her husband, a million thoughts rushing through her head. She looked down at her sweet, innocent baby boy and sighed. Promise me that if these people won't honor him, that I can leave with him and not be pursued, she said with pleading eyes. She knew Minato wouldn't give up and there really was no other alternative. She just wished it didn't have to be this way. Minato nodded and quickly unrolled the scroll before adding it to the conditions he had given Sarutobi. It's done, Kushina-chan. He walked over to her and hugged her while putting their heads together so they could stare at their son. He's gonna be a lady killer when he grows up, Minato said with a smile. As if knowing his dad was speaking about him, Naruto opened his eyes to show two beautiful sapphire orbs. Kushina let out a barking laugh. Yeah, but he won't have to worry about his fans once I am through with him, she said with tears in her eyes. Minato nodded and kissed Kushina on the head before taking Naruto into his arms. I'll have Sarutobi bring him back soon. I love you, he said before vanishing in a yellow flash. Kushina gripped the sheets as the first roars of the Kyuubi made itself known over Konoha. Tears fell from her face and stained the sheets below until she heard a voice speak. I'm afraid that you won't be able to live up to your husband's expectations. I cannot allow you to interfere with my master's plan, said a man with an orange spiral mask. Kushina's head whipped up and she glared at the man. She readied herself to fight, but, before she could act, the man spoke again. I will ensure that my master wins this day. Kamui, he said, opening his eye. Kushina felt the fabric of reality twist and turn, and she let loose a roar of maternal fury and launched herself at the man with a hidden kunai. Surprised by her actions and the sudden inclusion of a massive amount of Yuki-infused killing intent, Ki, the man was taken unaware and stabbed fatally in the heart. His eye, however, was unaffected and Kushina's roar faded as the man's body turned to dust and she disappeared from reality. With Sarutobi. After the sealing, Sarutobi picked up young Naruto and frowned at the boy. Things were not supposed to be this way. He looked around the Hokage's office and sighed deeply. It had been nearly 5 hours since the sealing. He had received distressing news just a moment ago. The Kyuubi's attack had destroyed the maternity ward where Kushina was supposedly staying. They had yet to find her body. Tsunade had, apparently, seen the destruction and, believing that both Kushina and Naruto were inside, fled from Konoha almost immediately after 2 hours of searching the rubble. Now, he was once again the Hokage and he needed to report to the council about the Kyuubi and the rumors of a demon child. He held no illusions that Naruto's life would never be normal, however, he did hope to give his surrogate grandson as normal of a life as possible. Minato would have wanted as much for his child. He sighed once again and pulled out a simple genjutsu tag and placed it on the boy's head. It would deter anyone but Sarutobi from making the connection between Naruto and the Yondaime until it was reapplied or the seal itself was noticed and destroyed by an experienced genjutsu user or put out when flooded with enough chakra to summon Gamabunta nearly 20 times. The only one currently able to destroy the seal would be the Sandaime or Jiraiya if he ever looked close enough. Sarutobi, still carrying Naruto, made his way through the tower, down some stairs, and through a pair of large double doors before being assaulted by the ruckus that was the council of Konohagakure. The room quickly quieted, however, when they noticed the bundle in his hands. Some thought it was the demon child, civilians, some thought it was an important child, clan heads like Sum, but 3 others thought of it as a weapon, Danzo and the elders. Sarutobi quickly made his way to his seat and set the child in front of him. He took a breath before making his announcement. The Yondaime Hokage has died and left me with the title of Hokage once again. I gladly serve this country once more. After a moment of praise and happy comments, he continued, now, in the aftermath of the attack, we are down by 40% of our shinobi forces, several residential and merchant buildings have been either destroyed or damaged, and we have a rather delicate matter to attend to aside from those problems. He said, gaining the attention of everyone in the room, including Jiraiya. Sarutobi pointed to the boy and said, Yondaime-sama was able to defeat Kyuubi by sealing it into this newborn babe. He didn't get a chance to start another sentence as cries of, demon child, and, kill it, were heard throughout the room before the Sandaime sighed and unleashed his full ki on the petty fools. Enough, he roared. I will not kill this child, Naruto Uzumaki. From this point forth, anyone who talks about the Kyuubi being sealed into Naruto will be killed for revealing an S-ranked secret. He said. Several people grumbled but ultimately gave in. Danzo, however, wasn't so easy to put down. I request the boy be put into my root program. We can have the boy be conditioned to serve only Konoha and to never question our orders this way. He could even learn to control the beast inside him. He said. Jiraiya and Sarutobi both glared at the man before the Sandaime spoke once again. Absolutely not, Danzo. I will not have an emotionless Jinchuriki running around the village. You will stay away from him and the boy will be allowed to live a normal life. Clear, he said, blasting the man and civilians with his ki once more. During this scene, Sum was eyeing the boy warily as she believed it could be Minato's son, however the genjutsu was messing with her mind and she dismissed it while thinking that Minato must have found another baby somehow. She did, however, have the marriage contract that Hana Inuzuka and Naruto Namikaze were to be married when Naruto turned 16. Little did she know that the contract wouldn't be seen for nearly 12 years. Back to the meeting, the Sandaime sighed at some of the more covert attempts to control the boy or to outright kill him. He decided to put Naruto in the orphanage and let him have a chance instead of being sabotaged by the various council members. He made his decree and dismissed the council before he told Jiraiya to run his spy network and keep it strong while watching for anything related to Jinchuriki. Jiraiya nodded sadly and quickly made his way out of the village. As the Hokage dropped off Naruto, the matron smiled at the boy and put him with the other orphans of the night. If she had stayed even a second longer, she would have seen the intricate seal on the babe's forearm with the kanji for 6 emblazoned in the middle before it disappeared. Time skip. 6 years. October 10th, Naruto's birthday. Sarutobi took another puff of his pipe as he looked out on the village he loved so much. And hated at the same time. The past 6 years had been close to a comparable hell for the young Jinchuriki. While none of the younger generation knew of the Kyuubi, as per the change in his law by the damned civilian council, the older generation absolutely despised the boy and made no secret of it. Just last year the matron had kicked Naruto out of the orphanage and Sarutobi had been forced to get him a rundown apartment and an allowance from his father's estate. He tried to get the people to understand, but they were too blinded by hate. Not that he could blame them fully. He understood that Naruto represented the embodiment of the death and destruction that had occurred that day. He knew that the village needed to vent their anger. However, he knew they were going too far. They had begun to physically harm Naruto, outside of the orphanage, and the Hokage was trying to prevent it. The boy deserved a better life than the one he was given. Every time he visited Naruto, he got the same question. "Why Ji-san?" Naruto would ask. It broke the man's heart not to inform the boy or at least keep it from happening. However, all he could do was tell the boy that the villagers needed forgiveness and that Naruto shouldn't blame them or take revenge. Little did he know that the unconscious repetition of this speech would fundamentally change the way Naruto viewed the world and his outlook on life. He sighed once again as he felt chakra signatures approach. He turned to the Anbu team and gave them a stern glare. "This year, if one person enters Naruto Uzumaki's apartment without his consent, then I will personally kill you all. Understood?" he asked in a deadly calm manner. The Anbu all nodded their consent before he dismissed them. This year would be the only year that Naruto did not receive a beating on his birthday. Naruto's apartment. 8 p.m. Naruto sat in his apartment all alone. He stared at the small cupcake that he had been able to purchase, at an outrageous price of course, with the single candle atop it. He quietly sung, "Happy Birthday," to himself whilst the Anbu ignored him from the outside. None of them cared about him, they simply had to guard him. He sniffled and then started to cry softly after he blew out the candle. The entire village hated him and he didn't know what he had done to earn their hate. In the orphanage, he had always been hidden away when adults had come to adopt a child, always being told that a demon doesn't deserve parents. He had cried initially, but he eventually grew used to the degrading remarks. He hid behind a mask of happiness, always smiling, always laughing, over the slightest thing. He knew it was but a defense against the village, but what else could he do? Ever since he had been thrown out by the matron of the orphanage, he had lived on the streets for a month before one of the masked men found him and his, Ji-san, as Naruto knew him, gave him this apartment. It was run down with only a small living room with a kitchen and bedroom attached with a bathroom inside the bedroom. He knew it wasn't much, but he was happy to know that his Ji-san cared enough to get him a place to live. He could only afford to buy ramen packets or, on rare occasions, to eat at Ichiraku's ramen bar. It was the only place in town that he could enter without being glared at, overpriced, or thrown out of. He smiled remembering the lunch the two ramen stand owners had given him and silently sent a prayer to Kami thanking them. Little did he know that a particular Kami was paying attention and she only wished she could do more. He remembered Ji-san always telling him to forgive the villagers, and while he didn't understand why he should, he took it to heart because it was the word of the old man who cared for him. Still, he knew the man was hiding the reason why he was hated and who his parents were. He had stopped asking simply because he knew he would not get a straight answer from the old man. Not that he didn't like the man, no he did, he just didn't trust him anymore. He finally stopped strolling down memory lane as grabbed his cupcake before slowly eating it. The only reason he ate so fast at Ichiraku's is so that he could leave and not affect their business, and so that no one can knock it away from him before he was done. In truth, Naruto liked to savor his food, not scarf it down like a ravenous dog. He sighed as he finished the cupcake and looked at the clock before heading to bed. He would be starting the academy soon and he would need his rest. He got into his room before he glanced down and noticed something on his arm. Now, luckily, the Sandaime had been able to ensure that he received enough education so as to read and write at least moderately well. He noticed the kanji for 6 on his arm pulsing for a minute before a puff of smoke appeared and a book along with a letter addressed to Naruto appeared in his hands. He looked at the books before looking at the seal in time to see it pulse before settling back into his arm with a slight change. Naruto didn't know it at the time, but the seal had several compartments, and each one was more difficult than the last. Naruto would be able to gradually unlock the next level after mastering the current level of sealing that his father had given him. Naruto looked at the book once again before shrugging and grabbing the note. Dear Naruto, I'm sorry for what has been done and that I cannot be there for you. I hope you can forgive me and that these notes and books will help you. They contain all my vast knowledge on the art of sealing. Please follow in my footsteps and I will be watching from above. Naruto sat there a little perplexed at the vague message. He shrugged his shoulders and picked up the book titled, Sealing for Dummies Volume 1. He knew only one thing as he started on the first chapter of what promised to be something both entertaining and powerfully useful. He would honor the mystery man's wish. He would follow in this man's footsteps because, even though Naruto had no idea who he was placing his faith in Naruto, and Naruto had no intention of letting the man down. A 10-year-old Naruto was running, in his usual bright orange attire, from the Junin that was chasing him after his latest prank. He laughed loudly even as he ducked into an alleyway and the Junin ran right past him looking all around. Naruto stayed hidden for a good 5 minutes before he dropped his hinge of a trash can and bursted out laughing again. He smiled remembering his latest prank. Several people would not allow Naruto to buy regular clothing or unspoiled food so he would prank them. His latest prank, a masterpiece, if he did say so himself, used an exploding tag set to go off from underneath a rack of clothing and turn everything into a myriad of neon orange to lime green colors. He had snuck into the store and set it up in the early morning and watched from a balcony across the street. That was how they found out that it was him who set up the prank. What no one knew was the real reasons behind these pranks was to test his abilities as a shinobi. He tested his stealth and infiltration by setting up the pranks, his intellect and observation by planning them, his speed and stamina by running from the various shinobi that would chase him afterwards. Everyone just thought they were cries for attention, which they did have that effect, but Naruto didn't do them for that. Hell, he even had the Sandaime fooled. Ever since he had received those books on his 6th birthday, Naruto had realized that he was somewhat of a prodigy in seals. That paint bomb seal took him about 10 minutes to invent and keep all the bugs out of it. He had only studied seals for 4 years and yet he was an expert class according to the notes. With his prowess and ability, he would be a seals master by the time he was 12. Despite this revelation, Naruto hid it from everyone. Simply put, Naruto didn't trust anyone with the knowledge that he was actually good at something. Everything that was ever good in his life was stripped from him and destroyed. He wouldn't allow that with this. He trained in secret, at night and outside the village. He had found an old abandoned base with a desk that he could use. Apparently it had been used by some guy named Orochimaru, but Naruto didn't care. He did care, however, when he found Orotem's, as Naruto came to call him, cursed seal notes. Naruto had only been at a journeyman level with seals when he found it, but he understood the basic concept and idea of the mark. For a quick review, seals levels went from apprentice to journeyman to expert to master. Simple but effective. An apprentice could probably use seals but barely understood them. A journeyman could understand the basic seals and use most of the intermediate level seals. An expert understood everything up to intermediate level seals and could even use some, if not most, master seals. Finally, a master could do just about anything with seals, even use them in battle. The Yondaime was a true seal master while Jiraiya was more of an upper-level expert than a master. Naruto had found that he understood the cursed seal and, recently, believed he could remove the accursed thing from anyone who wanted him to. He wasn't 100% certain if he could, but he was confident that, if a seals master like maybe Jiraiya would check his work, that it would be effective. He had figured out the catalyst, seeing as Orochimaru had been stupid enough to leave the chemical formula for it in the notes, that changed the person's body and mind. He had devised a seal that would purge the afflicted's body and allow him to destroy the seal at the same time. It would be painful, but possible. Naruto had also come to another conclusion in his studies. He was a Jinchuriki. He had noticed the complex seal array on his stomach anytime he practiced with his uncontrollable chakra. He had taken to studying it, even going so far as to make a copy and breaking it down into pieces so he could understand its function better. He had figured it out when he was 8 and he knew it had to be the Kyuubi sealed inside him. He had been a little scared at first, but after 2 years he just wanted to meet the beast and understand why it had caused so much destruction when there were no historical incidents with it before. He had tried to focus on his mind to access the area that previous Jinchurikis had mentioned within Orotem's notes, but anytime he did so he seemed to lose his concentration and was hit with a massive headache that would leave him wondering what exactly he had been doing right before. Orochimaru seemed to have a slight curiosity about how Jinchuriki would react to his curse mark. Naruto quit laughing and stood up while thinking about lunch. He patted his belly and made his way to the only place in town that would serve him, Ichiraku Ramen. He swiftly moved through the crowd and to his favorite restaurant. He walked in and sat down on his stool and smiled at Ayame. She was his sister figure and he trusted her much like he trusted the Sandaime. Not for the same reasons though. Tsuki, owner of Ichiraku's and Ayame's father, and Ayame were the first people to serve him without a price inflation and even gave him a free bowl from time to time. He trusted them enough to let them know of his daily life, but he did not burden them with the beatings and other abuse he put up with. On the same hand, he did not inform them of his sealing ability simply because it could cause trouble for all of them if they accidentally mentioned it to the wrong people. And yes, he meant accidental. He ordered his usual 10 miso ramen and smiled as Ayame disappeared into the back to speak with Tsuki. Today was his birthday after all. He knew he would have to hide in the forests at night and take any and all precious things from his apartment if he didn't want them destroyed like they were every year excluding his 6th birthday. It seems that the council had found a way past his yearly Anbu guards. Naruto didn't know how, nor did he care. All he knew was he had to fend for himself. Tsuki came out of the back with a big smile on his old face. Well, Naruto, it's good to see you again, my boy. How is the academy going? He asked as he tended to the noodles now being cooked. Naruto let loose his epic grin and responded loudly, "It's great. We learned Kawarimi yesterday. I can't wait to graduate." He wouldn't tell Tsuki that the whole loud-mouthed idiot mask was to make the teachers believe that they didn't have to sabotage him, although they still did, and so the council wouldn't block him because they would believe he'd die on any high-class mission without any skills. Tsuki smiled as Ayame came out of the back with enough materials for Naruto's order. "That's good. I can already see you with that headband," he said as he placed the first bowl in front of Naruto. "First 5 bowls are on me tonight, kid. Happy birthday," he said. Naruto responded with his usual enthusiasm, "Thanks Tsuki-ji-san." He yelled as he dug in. Ayame giggled and Tsuki laughed loudly, but you could feel the warmth coming from Naruto. He rarely got gifts on his birthday and this was one of the best he'd ever received. The other was the very jumpsuit he wore, given to him by the Sandaime. It had the same genjutsu seal woven into it as the one that used to be on his forehead, not that Naruto knew that, he wore it out of love for the old man and because it helped with his stealth training tremendously. Naruto spent a good 3 hours with the Ichirakus before heading home for the night. He could already see the people who were setting up for the festival. He sorely hoped that he could avoid the annual fox hunt, as it had come to be called. He had no intentions of being caught this year. He made it home within 20 minutes and gathered the few pieces of clothing, various cups of ramen, and sealing supplies that he had borrowed from people who denied him service. He looked outside and swore. It was getting dark and he was barely leaving his apartment. He sealed all his belongings into the chakra seal that the mysterious man had originally placed on him and set it to release in the morning or if his chakra was fed into the seal at certain intervals. He quickly left his apartment and ran for the forest of death. Hopefully, it would save him as it had in the past. Midnight. Forest of Death. Naruto was panting hard. He had evaded most of the mobs but had been caught by some particularly vicious Anbu. He sighed as he felt them pass overhead. Maybe he could get away after all. Well, what do we have here? An Anbu with a ox mask said. Maybe not. Naruto thought as he silently cursed his luck. Seems like we got a little fox here. What do ya say we make a show out of it? His partner in the snake mask replied. Naruto got up and started to run but didn't get very far before he was yanked back and tied up by the man with the ox mask. Now, we just want to let the villagers have their annual fun with the village demon. You wouldn't want to ruin that, huh? He said. Naruto scowled and spit on the man's mask. Go yourself, you ox. Naruto yelled. Ox didn't take too kindly to that and backhanded Naruto, forcing him to grit his teeth in pain. Ox pulled Naruto roughly to his feet. Don't worry. There's plenty more where that came from. Ox said as his friend chuckled. Ox picked up Naruto and bounded away into the trees with Naruto raining obscenities all the way. Soon enough, Naruto found himself in the most hated place he could be, in front of a mob on his birthday in an alleyway secluded from the village proper. Naruto chuckled grimly in his mind but decided if he was going to be hurt, at least he'd make it worthless for them. The Anbu took money from the crowd to let them throw stones at Naruto. Naruto simply stood there and didn't even try to move. His famous foxy smile on full blast, and it unnerved several of the mobsters. Unfortunately, it pissed more of them off and they started throwing stones without paying. They yelled obscenities and things like, "This is for my sister," or the ever classic, "Die demon." Some started to throw bottles and as the first one shattered on his head, all hell broke loose. They soon began to close in and beat him with sticks and pieces of pipe. Luckily no one had a real weapon. That didn't mean he wasn't damaged, however. Broken bones, crushed organs, it was amazing he was still alive and conscious. Little did the villagers know that, after all the years of abuse and pressure, a seal made itself known on the back of Naruto's head and glowed white before shattering and allowing the boy to fall into the sweet bliss of unconsciousness. The last thing Naruto saw was the Hokage descending into the mob like a vengeful angel. Mindscape. Same time, Naruto opened his eyes to notice that he felt no pain. He thought that was odd until he saw that there were pipes running along the wall of what seemed to be a sewer. He frowned and thought, so they threw me in the sewer. I thought I saw Oji-san coming to rescue me. He thought for a few more seconds before dismissing it as an illusion. His thought process came to a halt as he heard a soft boom echo throughout the sewer. He frowned when he heard it again and again. It was like someone was throwing themselves against a wall or something like that. Curious, like most boys, he made his way towards the sound. As it got louder, he could tell it must have come from something far stronger and far larger than himself to make this much noise. He noticed a red glow coming from ahead and the sounds of crying and someone yelling gibberish. He could tell they were pissed but he couldn't tell at what. He noticed the light intensify and he stepped into a large room and looked to his right only for him to freeze at the sight. A large red fox with burning red eyes was slamming itself into cage bars as large as the Hokage monument themselves. That wasn't what stopped him, however. This fox had 9 tails and Naruto had just figured out that he was now in his mindscape. It took all of 5 seconds for him to process this and to listen to the ranting demon. The Kyuubi continued to throw itself into the bars while crying. Its eyes burned with a fierce hatred, and Naruto could make sense of its words now that he was close enough. Let me out. The kid needs me. I will tear those humans to pieces. It yelled as it threw its weight against the seal once again. Naruto's eyes widened and then narrowed. Why does it want to help me? He thought. Please. Please. Let me help him. Please. Kyuubi said, its voice getting softer as its body collapsed, heaving from the effort of trying to help its container. Naruto was shocked to say the least. No one had ever just helped him before. He had been the first customer of Ayame and Tuki. Yet, here was a being, called a demon of all things, wanting to help him. Slowly, he made his way forward and to the fox, who was still oblivious to its company. He looked at the gates for only a second before entering them and walking up to the being who wanted to help him. He sat down and grabbed one of the tails that had fallen still. Gently, he stroked its crimson fur, admiring the quality and sheer feel of it. Soft, almost like velvet, Naruto thought with a soft smile. Kyuubi's head shot up as, guess I can say it now, huh? Her container stroked one of the vixen's tails. She turned its head and was shocked to see the boy, no man that was stroking her tail without a fear or care in the world. No being had ever gotten close enough to Kyuubi without her permission before. Kyuubi's eyes softened and lost the crimson glow as they turned into a deep shade of cerulean blue. Yeah, I changed the color. Big whoop. Wanna fight about it? Kyuubi smiled brightly and spoke to the boy. It would seem that my container is either bravely foolish or foolishly brave. She said softly, her voice becoming more feminine without her rage fueling it. Naruto appeared unfazed as he continued to stroke her tail. Either is fine with me, Kyuubi-san. However, I would like to know if what you said earlier is true. He said as his gaze turned and captured her own, all without stopping his actions with her tail. Kyuubi's breath hitched as she stared into his eyes. Those eyes were far too old for a 10-year-old. Her gaze softened once again. Every word, Naruto-kun. She replied. Naruto stared for a moment before stopping his hand and earning a groan of disappointment from the vixen. He smirked at her and she blushed, although he couldn't see it. Well, it seems the fabled Kyuubi has a weak spot for her tails. He said as he stroked her tail once again, getting a low rumbling purr from the demoness. Kyuubi gathered her thoughts and smirked. So you figured out I am a female and have not made some stupid remark. I'm liking you more and more, Kit. She replied as she curled up to put her snout directly in front of him. Naruto chuckled. Women are more important than men. Without women, we would not exist, for it is the woman that bears and raises a child. The man only aids in the process. Although, some men do take their responsibilities more serious than others and some women forsake their duty, but we are not here to discuss which gender is better. He said with a smirk at his resident. Kyuubi chuckled. Indeed, Kit. I wish to offer you something. If you accept, I will be most happy for you. If not, then nothing is lost on my end. She replied as she got serious. Naruto looked at her for a moment before nodding and said, very well, but what do you expect in return for this offer? Kyuubi was taken aback by that statement and replied, Kit, nothing. I have been awake for a week and, while I have not seen everything you have been through, why would you be so distrusting? Kyuubi could sense feelings coming from her container, but she could not look into his memories. Naruto was silent for a moment before replying, no one has ever just given me something, Kyuubi-san. Even Oji-san made me promise certain things when he gave me my own apartment. My birthday gifts are out of pity, not because they simply want to give me something. His voice was almost devoid of emotion as he spoke. It was obvious he did not believe anyone loved him. Kyuubi frowned. She may have been an immortal demoness, but no one deserved to be unloved, unless they chose it, of course. Kyuubi nodded and said, very well. My offer still stands. I wish to help train you. I will teach you what I know of chakra control and what few jutsus I do know, including Shunshin and a few useful ones like Cage Bunshin. In return, I want nothing except your happiness. It is that simple. Take it or leave it, Naruto-kun. As a note, my name is actually Hikari. She dearly hoped he would take the offer. She wanted to see more of his life and help him. In just a week, she had seen the hatred he had taken, and having no one to love him was not something she would allow. She could see how kind he was to animals and the people who were at least neutral towards him. Naruto looked at her for a moment before nodding. She was about to speak when he spoke the words she thought she'd never hear. Would you like to leave this cage? He asked. Hikari blinked and stared at Naruto. What? She replied. Naruto continued to stare and responded, I said, would you like to leave this cage? I did not believe I would need to repeat myself. Hikari was stunned. He would let her out. Why would he do that? Naruto, that's. She couldn't answer. She knew the seal was strong. There was no way he could release her without destroying himself in the process. Naruto smiled softly, a true smile. You are the first person to offer me something that I did not ask for. You are my friend, and, even if you were not, I cannot stand to see a girl cry nor to see someone behind bars when it is obvious they do not belong there. He replied sincerely. Hikari smiled and her body glowed until Naruto found himself staring at what he would call a goddess. She was about 5 feet 8 inches with crimson red hair, 2 red fox ears with black tips, and those beautiful blue eyes. Her skin was a healthy tan color and she had 3 whisker marks just like Naruto. She had DD cup and a slim waist that showed off her shapely rear and well-toned legs. She was wearing a beautiful red kimono and her 9 tails were splayed out behind her, red with black tips. Naruto gawked for a second before he heard Hikari giggling and he moved his stare into her eyes. He refused to be a pervert. She smiled at him, like what you see? She asked as she gave a twirl to show off her form. Naruto simply nodded dumbly. She giggled again and Naruto found the sound to be like soft bells in the wind. You were saying, about getting out of the seal? She asked. Hikari's voice will be normal in her human form. Naruto nodded. I studied the seal extensively. It won't allow you to leave with your power without killing me, but that doesn't mean you can't leave and then have me provide the power to you, nay? He asked with a smirk. Hikari stared for a second before looking down. You haven't even asked me why I attacked or anything. You haven't blamed me for all those people dying. Why are you being so kind? She asked. Naruto grew serious. I searched for a year for any mention of you being hostile in the past and found absolutely nothing. There was no reason for you to attack Konoha, so I figure someone must have tricked you or controlled you. I hope it's the first because I do not want to face someone who can control you, he replied. Hikari smiled and hugged Naruto before whispering thank you, into his ear. She pushed him back and grew serious. Naruto, I was tricked by a man known as Orochimaru into attacking the village. Unfortunately, he is not what he appears to be. Seeing the confused look, she continued to explain. Some years ago the celestial beings, along with the Biju combated a vicious creature known as the Yamata no Orochi. We eventually succeeded in sealing away his power, but it seems that he has returned and is determined to achieve immortality once again and wage war amongst the heavens. He was able to catch me asleep and used a powerful genjutsu to cause me to fly into an uncontrollable rampage. I am sorry, Naruto, she said. Naruto simply nodded at the story. That explains that. He said, now, to get out of the seal, I'm going to need your consent to separate your body and your power for a time. You can come and go inside the seal once this is complete, but, as I understand the seal, you cannot die so long as even 1% of your chakra is inside me. You will return when your chakra runs out and you will have to stay in the seal until it recharges. Luckily, your body will have enough so you could stay out indefinitely if you used only everyday chakra, he explained. Hikari nodded. Listen, Naruto, I wanted to ask your permission to see your memories. While I could just do it, I feel it would violate your privacy and I don't want to do that. She said. Naruto raised an eyebrow but smiled and said, thank you for asking Hikari-chan, but why would you want to see my memories? Most of them are not pleasant. His voice became sad and lonely at the end of that sentence. Hikari frowned and said, I want to get to know you a little better. Besides that though, I was thinking about making a contract with you and I was hoping to see something in your memories that would help me cater the contract to you. Naruto's eyes widened but he was curious. This contract, what is it? He asked. Hikari looked at him and replied, basically. It's an agreement between the two of us that I grant you a specific power and you do something for me in return. It's actually how most bloodlines were created. Oh, and it would also serve to give you control so I could get out of this seal. She replied. Naruto's eyes took on a devious glint that sent a shiver down Hikari's spine. It reminded her of herself when she was thinking of something fun. So you could give me a bloodline? He asked. Hikari nodded. If that's what you want, she said. Naruto thought for a second and slowly added up the pros and cons. Finally, he nodded to Hikari, very well. I'll allow you to look, but please be careful. I'd rather not have to relive something because you get curious. He replied. Hikari smiled brightly. This was a major sign of trust and she was hoping to get that. Apparently being inside him at birth had helped somewhat. Okay, you won't have to relive anything. I'll just go through it now that you gave me the go-ahead. She replied and closed her eyes before a tendril of red chakra went down the hallway and into a door. For almost 2 hours, Hikari watched everything Naruto went through and was horrified. She couldn't explain how much damage these villagers had done and she wanted to tear several limb from limb. When all was said and done, she collapsed and cried into Naruto's chest, who simply held her and whispered to help her deal with it. She finally stopped crying and looked at Naruto. I believe it's time for that contract, Naruto. She said with puffy eyes and a smile on her face. You mean it? Naruto said, acting a bit like his goofy self at the prospect of a bloodline. Hikari nodded her head. Definitely, I even have an idea for a bloodline if you want, she replied. Naruto nodded his head as he hadn't thought of anything particularly viable. Since you get attacked so much, how about a defensive bloodline to help you not get hurt? She suggested. Naruto cocked his head to the side as they sat on the floor Indian style. Yeah, but how? I mean, it's a great idea, but just how do we stop things from hurting me? He asked. Hikari put her finger to her chin in a thinking position and thought for a moment before snapping her fingers. I got it, she said. We will allow you to change your skin into an adamantium-like armor. I'll even make it resistant to jutsus to a certain extent. The only downside is that lightning jutsu would be extremely effective against you when your bloodline is active, she explained. Naruto thought for a few seconds before his grin grew to epic proportions. Great idea, Hikari-chan, he said enthusiastically, missing the blush that came to Hikari's face. Hey, when you see all of someone's life before your eyes, wouldn't you get a little attached too? Besides, her mind was already thinking of things she could clear's throat take care of, to make sure he's something every woman would want. She came back to the real world just as Naruto asked, so what would you want in return for this, Hikari-chan? I know you can't just give it to me. Hikari chuckled and sauntered over to Naruto, who suddenly had a very bad feeling about what she would want. What I want, Naruto-kun, is very simple. You see, finding a mate is a very tricky ordeal because I am very picky. Also, I can't mark you as my eternal mate because my power is inside you, so I don't have the strength to do so. Naruto's feeling got even worse as she was now face to face with him and breathing hotly onto him. My want, Naruto, is for you to make me your lover when you come of age, in other words, be my mate. She said with a bit of lust in her voice at the end to accentuate her point. Naruto gulped as he felt her body be pressed against his and her lips softly caressing his own. He slowly relaxed and enjoyed the kiss only to feel her break off and look at him smirking. Naruto nodded in consent and said, "Fine, fine. It's a deal, Hikari-chan. Don't know why you'd want me though." He spoke softly at the end. Hikari just giggled and said, "By the time I'm done with you, you won't be asking that question again." She said with a slightly perverse smile that Naruto didn't know whether to be happy about or be scared of. "Now, let's get to work. Get used to the perverted girls because it's going to be a theme." Cue perverse giggle from Hikari. Time skip. 2 days. Sarutobi Hiruzen was having a horrible 2 days. First, his paperwork was so bad that he couldn't visit Naruto on his birthday. Then, he finds out that a mob has somehow caught Naruto outside his apartment on his birthday. Finally, he arrives on scene only to see his surrogate grandson being beaten to death, and, when he takes him to the hospital, he had to threaten people to heal him. That was only day 1. Today, he spent 3 hours in the council room with the idiotic civilian council, and the apathetic clan heads, as they ranted and raved about how the demon had done some damage or other when Sarutobi knew it was a load of bullshit. When he finally dismissed them, it was noon and his paperwork had built up. He had been so tempted to burn it all. Instead, he had brought it with him as he had gone to the hospital to visit Naruto and, hopefully, apologize for the attack once again. He had watched for years as the village took its hate out on Naruto and had tried to help Naruto cope with it. He had been somewhat helpful, but he still didn't think that Naruto fully trusted him. He didn't know why, just call it a gut feeling. He had arrived at the hospital and proceeded to Naruto's room. He entered only to see him still asleep and hooked up to the various machines. He spent most of his afternoon there and surprisingly felt several small chakra pulses from Naruto. Before he could have it investigated by the doctors, however, Naruto stirred and began to wake up. This prompted Sarutobi's full attention because he didn't know if Naruto had met the fox. He had never been unconscious for more than a few hours, so it was logical to assume that something kept Naruto from awakening. He stared as Naruto's eyes opened and smiled when Naruto yelled out with his usual enthusiasm. "Hey Oji-san!" Naruto yelled. Sarutobi chuckled before he responded, "This is a hospital, Naruto-kun. Please keep it down, but it is good to see you again. Although I wish it were under better circumstances," the Hokage said. Naruto chuckled and apologized. Sarutobi grew serious and said, "I'm sorry once again, Naruto-kun. You should not have to wake in this hospital," and yet, he never got to finish as he felt Naruto's glare. "I love you, Oji-san, but if you give me one more speech about forgiving the villagers' ignorance, then I'm gonna take your pipe and shove it down your throat," Naruto said in a half-serious, half-playful manner. To say Sarutobi was shocked would be an understatement. He was absolutely flabbergasted. Naruto would never threaten him. Just as he was about to accuse the impostor or look for some genjutsu or prank, Naruto spoke again. "I don't have the villagers, Oji-san. I'm simply tired of hearing the same thing every time I'm in the hospital. I know they hate me for something, but I just can't understand what it could be," Naruto said, his head going down in sorrow. Sarutobi looked sorrowfully at the boy. It was definitely Naruto to not hate the villagers, so it had to be him. Besides, he could feel the Kyuubi's chakra that lingered after healing the boy now that he focused on it. He considered telling the boy his burden here and now, like he had every time Naruto was in the hospital, but mentally shook it away and simply hugged the boy instead. Mentally, Naruto and Hikari were laughing up a storm. Literally, there was a storm in Naruto's mind of mouths just laughing. "Kid, you could start your own acting company. I can't believe the old man is falling for this," she told him. "I know. Kami no shinobi mai. He can't even see through a 10-year-old's bullshit," Naruto thought back as he hugged his grandfather. Honestly, Naruto didn't want to lie to the old man, but if the Hokage was keeping secrets, then why shouldn't he? After all, he knew there was no way Sarutobi would let him have continued access to Hikari. The safety of the village, and all that jazz. "Nay, Oji-san, could I get out of here?" Naruto asked as Sarutobi pulled away. Sarutobi smiled softly and picked up his chart. After a few moments to make sure everything was in order, he nodded to Naruto. "Sure, Naruto-kun, I can sign you out because it looks like you healed up just fine," he said. Naruto, still being a kid and in his mask, jumped up and rushed to put on his jumpsuit before dragging his Oji-san out of the room so they could go get some ramen. They quickly checked out of the hospital and headed to Ichiraku's for some dinner. Naruto kept up his mask and was able to throw off Sarutobi from remembering about the chakra pulses in the hospital room. Sarutobi smiled at Naruto and got up to go home as the Ichirakus closed the shop for the night. It was getting late and he had to get home. Naruto bid him a farewell and watched as he disappeared down the street. Naruto smirked before heading to his hidden lab to check and make sure no one had found his hideaway or his notes on ceiling. Naruto's hidden lab. 10:15 p.m. Naruto entered and smirked as he saw all his notes still in the position he left them. He began to look through his notes until he came across the seal he designed for removing a curse seal. He wanted to make sure that it would work theoretically before he even tried to make it into a practical application. He believed he had enough information to remove the seal, but he still had a nagging feeling that he should take a look at an active seal before he tried applying his seal. There may have been changes from the notes, or it may have reacted badly to the host's body and attempted to destroy its chakra coils or something along those lines. He sighed and set them aside, they were useless for now. He picked up a seal he had specially designed to make him faster and stronger than just using weights or a gravity seal. A resistance seal. It, basically, increased the force against every little movement he made. He had to be careful, however, because he could break his bones if he put it too high, or he could develop muscles that have nothing to do with fighting and cause them to limit his mobility during combat. He had found his way around that by adding in limiter seals so that the resistance was only on the muscles he wanted. He had studied anatomy just for the muscles, and, while he was no medic nin, he could properly locate and describe the different functions of bones and muscles in his body. He doubted that the information would be used often, but better to be prepared than caught unawares. He smiled in contentment as he picked up a special ink container that had ink laced with his blood and chakra on it before he started to draw the seal on his chest. 30 minutes later, and much rechecking of the seal, Naruto was ready to activate it. He sent a small amount of chakra into his seal and immediately felt his muscles begin contracting to work against the resistance. He smiled brightly and yelled in excitement as he declared the seal a success. "Congratulations, Naruto-kun. I am rather surprised at how good you are with seals," Hikari said in his mind. "Thanks, Hikari-chan," Naruto replied. "I am glad it worked, but I still wanna find a way to remove the curse seal and maybe find a way to incorporate seals into my battle style," Naruto added. Hikari nodded mentally in his head. "I may not be a seals master, but I could probably help with organizing and challenging your ideas, Naruto-kun," she offered. Naruto beamed with happiness. "Thanks again, Hikari-chan. I would appreciate that. I never had anybody just offer to be my idea board," he said mentally. Hikari smiled in his mind. "Get used to it now that I'm here. I won't leave you and I won't betray you, my mate," she said, adding a little lust with the mate word. Naruto shivered and blushed in response. He wasn't old enough to have perverted thoughts yet, but that didn't mean that Hikari was going to wait. She had already explained what being a mate entailed and said that she would be enhancing a few of his features to make it more enjoyable for her. Naruto had actually given permission for it so long as she didn't change his ideas or his obvious looks. Not that she was going to do that anyways. He had no objections to it because it meant that he would have a family sometime later in his life and, secretly, that was one of his goals. Besides, who wouldn't want to be married, by demon standards, to a goddess like Hikari? Naruto didn't want to find the man that didn't. In any case, Naruto smiled warmly and replied, I seem to be thanking you a lot. What do ya say we just skip that and start brainstorming, ya? Hikari laughed. Very well. Actually, I may have a solution to your seals in battle idea. She said. Noticing she had his attention, she continued, my chakra ability, that every biju has, mind you, is to literally make my chakra solid, usually into a cloak around my person. Now, you, by extension of me, now have that ability, but I doubt that you could form the cloak or anything small without enormous training in control and capacity. She noticed his disappointment but continued in favor of making him happy. I do believe that you could trace a seal in the air using your chakra before touching it and activating its effects by making the seal into reality by using your chakra. You would have to train to focus your chakra to your finger, but that is far easier than controlling all your chakra and trying to force it into something small. She explained. As she finished, she could feel his happiness and giddiness at the idea that he could simply draw seals in midair. Naruto was grinning from ear to ear as he sent a mental hug to his mate. Alright, I can't wait to see if that works. Naruto replied enthusiastically. He looked at the clock and noticed it was midnight. He frowned as he knew the training would have to wait. He needed to leave now if he didn't want to catch the last call round of drunks. After a quick use of seals, and putting away all of his material, he promptly disappeared into the forest surrounding the entrance that was hiding in a bush. Konoha streets. 12:30 a.m. Naruto was stealthily making his way home to sleep off the excitement when he heard a loud noise in the nearby alleyway. He was tempted to ignore it and continue on his way, passing it off as nothing but a regular everyday cat or something. However, he heard a scream and he froze. That was a female scream and it wasn't the good kind. He sighed to himself and thought, I can't let a woman get raped or something, I'd be worse than the villagers. Hikari-chan, think you could help me out if I get into trouble? He asked the Fox Queen. Definitely, Naruto-kun. Let's see what's going on. She replied as she brought up a screen inside her cage to see through his eyes. Naruto smiled at Hikari's helpfulness and scaled the nearby building, only 1 story tall, and looked down on the alleyway. Anko Mitarashi was not having a good day. She woke up and got dressed rather quickly, but things went downhill from there. The esteemed council had denied her advancement to full Junin once again, with the only blemish on her record as the time away from Konoha when she had been marked by Orochimaru. After spending all morning trying to get them to change the bigots, she had gone to lunch only to find that her favorite dango stand had run out of dango and red bean soup, her favorite meal. After lunch, she was scheduled to do an interrogation, except that the man had, apparently, escaped from the custody of the Anbu. So, she had spent most of her afternoon tracking down the bastard and interrogating him. She had ended up with a new scar on her left arm and a sprained ankle for her troubles. It had been 9 p.m. by the time she was done and she still hadn't eaten dinner. After her report, she had promptly run to the nearest bar and ordered some dango and sake. That was where everything went straight into the gutter and kept going until it reached the deepest pits of the sewer. She hadn't been paying attention to her alcohol consumption and was thoroughly drunk. Unfortunately, several of the men who believed she was nothing more than Orochimaru's spy had found her and proceeded to secretly buy her drinks, and one of them had apparently slipped her a drug that would leave her very sober but completely disoriented. That is what led her to right now. She was surrounded by 6 men, all civilians, although one was a poison maker that had made the drug. She was down to nothing but her panties and they were preparing to rip them off when she had done something she had swore to never do: scream like a woman. She hated being weak, and this was the first time she was this close to being actually raped. Orochimaru hadn't touched her because, she believed, he liked little boys. Sure, people had tried before, but she had always kicked theirs. She wasn't Konoha's snake mistress for nothing after all. They slammed her head into the pavement, making her vision swim, and she knew she'd probably black out soon enough. She cried at the thought that she'd lose her virginity to some jerks that were just trying to get their rocks off. The men just laughed harder as they ripped her panties off and forced her to sit up and look down at her form. Don't cry, you're going to enjoy this, you snake whore. The man who had dropped his pants said as the other men were still laughing. He began to kneel down. Up on the roof, this was the scene that Naruto came upon. And it made his blood boil. He hated seeing anyone being taken advantage of, but to top it off with it being a crying woman, that was the line for Naruto. Hikari-chan, can you get me enough ki to make these men shit their pants and never come near her again? Naruto asked, knowing that was his only option right now as he had no sealing materials on him, not that he had the time to make the seals. Naruto heard a bestial growl come from the seal and smiled, of course I can. Show these men what happens when they try to take what is not theirs. Hikari said angrily. She agreed wholeheartedly with Naruto's sentiments. Men should not try to force themselves on unwilling women, and the ones that did were too weak to claim a real woman. Naruto noticed the man getting closer and focused all his ki on that one whilst Hikari helped to guide her own against the others. Needless to say, the effect was instantaneous. The men stopped and started to shiver, and Naruto smelt several disgusting smells as the men did exactly what he wanted, shit themselves. Naruto felt Hikari put some of her chakra into his body and smirked at the looks on the men's faces as they came to face what they believed to be a demon. You may want to leave while I'm still in a good mood, otherwise, Naruto flexed his claws, I may not be so kind when I get down there. He said. The men looked at one another before they all scattered, too scared to think that he was just a 10-year-old boy. Naruto jumped down into the alleyway and felt the demonic chakra recede. Luckily, Hikari had kept the output so low that no one had noticed it. He looked at the woman before quickly gathering the fishnet shirt, shingords, skirt, and trenchcoat and put it in her lap. He saw her look up at him before her eyes rolled into the back of her head and noticed the bump forming on the back. He panicked until he heard Hikari's voice, put your hand on her head, Naruto-kun. He did so and watched as a small amount of red chakra healed the wound. She will be out until morning, so you're safe, but you may want to check her shoulder. I believe it holds something of interest to you. Hikari said. Naruto was curious, so he did as Hikari asked and his breath hitched in his throat. There, on her shoulder, was an active curse seal. Naruto frowned. While inwardly he was happy to have found an active curse seal, he was very angry at the way on which he had found it. He sighed and tried to pick her up only to fail. He felt Hikari pump her chakra into his arms and legs. He mentally thanked her and picked up the woman. He didn't know her name nor where she lived, so he resolved himself to take her to the lab so he could study the seal before she awoke. He struggled for a moment before hurrying towards the lab. Luckily, it took him only 5 minutes to get to the lab with Hikari's help. He set the woman down on the futon he kept here before covering her body up to her neck. He put her gear next to the bed and took a minute before sighing. Looks like I'm not getting any sleep tonight. Let's get to work, Hikari. Naruto said, gaining a mental nod from the fox demoness. Anko slowly awoke. The first thing she noticed was that she was both covered with a sheet and she was. Her headache, which should have been prevalent, was nowhere to be found and she didn't know where her clothes were. She slowly opened her eyes while preparing her body in case she needed to fight off some pervert or rapist. What she saw, however, she was not expecting. She opened her eyes and looked to her right only to see her clothes and equipment. She looked around and noticed she seemed to be in an underground bunker of some sort. She scanned the room, taking in the mostly empty space, except for a few filing cabinets and a door that seemed to lead into a hallway. She kept going around until she came upon the desk that was littered with different papers. She couldn't read them from here, but she could see a few hanging off the edge. She silently got up and got dressed with all her gear. She didn't remember coming here, but everything was hazy from the time she took her first drink till now. She quietly made her way to the door until she heard another door slam in the distance. Her heart raced and she tried to figure out what to do. Finally, her instincts kicked in and she quickly used her chakra to hang onto the ceiling directly over the door and wait for whoever it was to come into the room and interrogate them. Naruto had just finished making 3 bowls of instant ramen and was bringing them back to hopefully, awake woman and feed her something. He knew ramen wasn't particularly good, but it was all he had. He was balancing the ramen and 2 glasses of tea on a tray when he walked into his study only to find that the woman was nowhere in sight. Hikari was asleep right now and he quickly grew concerned, so he headed over to the desk and set the food and drink down. He immediately started to walk back towards the door when he was tackled by a purple blur. When Naruto walked in, Anko was shocked to see a 10-year-old boy tending to her and in a bunker no less. Still, she was wary until he turned around. She immediately suffered a flashback and everything that the men had done to her returned full force. The last thing she remembered before blacking out was a blonde-headed boy trying to pick her up after putting her gear into her lap. After freezing for a moment, and thinking for one more, she quickly decided on a course of action and sprang. Naruto rolled with the purple blur until he found himself being pressed into the futon by the very woman he was about to go look for. He stared up at her until he found a kunai at his throat. Immediately, his demeanor changed and he glared at her with as much ki and unrestrained hate as he could muster, which was a very large amount considering what he put up with daily in Konoha. Anko was shivering. If she hadn't faced Orochimaru's ki, she would have been knocked out by this kid's ki. A kid, not even out of the academy, could produce enough ki to rival a Sannin. That was damn impressive and it caused Anko to rethink her plan. She had originally intended to interrogate the kid on what he was doing, but now she was impressed and a bit curious as to just why this kid could produce so much ki. She took a closer look and gasped, she had the Kyuubi Gaki. Oh, this was so not good, the Sandaime would kill her if she hurt him. Naruto cleared his throat, gaining Anko's attention. You know, this is an awful way to treat someone who saved you from being raped. He said coldly. Anko chuckled nervously. I know that, but why did you save me? She asked, genuinely curious as she removed the kunai from his throat, although she didn't let him up. Naruto looked at her curiously. Do I need a reason to rescue a beautiful woman from being taken advantage of? He asked seriously, his cold edge slightly abated with the kunai gone. Anko blushed, in both embarrassment and from the compliment, as she remembered that he had saved her and hadn't done anything to her while she was knocked out. Sorry, I'm just not used to people helping me. Normally, no one would care, so I was curious as to why you would. She said as she let him get up. Naruto stood up and stared at her for a moment before extending his hand. Naruto Uzumaki. And considering my reputation, you should know the answer to your question. He said. Anko smirked and grabbed his hand. Anko Midarashi, and single snake mistress of Konoha at your service, she replied. Naruto shook her hand and let it go. So I'm assuming you knew Orochimaru before his betrayal and that's why those men called you a snake whore? He asked bluntly. Anko winced but hid it behind her mask and smiled brightly before saying, Nah, you do one guy in his office and word gets around even when you threaten him and his friend to remove their unmentionables. She replied with her usual gusto. Naruto frowned as Hikari woke up in his mind. She is hiding her pain just like you, Naruto-kun. Perhaps you should help her with it. Naruto sent a mental shake of his head. I'd have to remove that seal and, after studying it, I need to add a few things to remove and destroy the piece of Orotem's soul, otherwise she'll die as it is now. Hikari sent a mental nod back as Naruto decided to continue to be frank with Anko. Anko-san, I have done you the courtesy of not hiding behind my mask. May I please ask you to do the same? He said. Anko opened her mouth to respond with her mask on until she looked into Naruto's eyes. Her words died in her throat as she looked upon the same eyes that had shocked Hikari just days ago. So cold and alone. Just like mine. Enko thought as her mask slowly crumbled before Naruto's eyes. Fine Gaki. Yes, that's why they called me a snake whore, and that's why nobody ever helps me. Only my friends Kurenai-chan, Hana-chan, Yugao-chan, and the Hokage believe me to be loyal to Konoha, and only the old man has broken my mask. She replied. She didn't know fully why she felt compelled to confide in him, but she did know she felt like she could trust him with her life. Naruto smiled softly. Thank you, Anko-san. I don't know why, but I feel like we outcasts should stick together, nay? He said. Anko chuckled. Indeed we should, kid. So tell me, where are we anyways? She asked. Naruto frowned. We are in an underground bunker I found and used to study my passion. I don't trust the villagers to not destroy the only thing I'm good at or that I take an interest in. He replied. He quietly walked over to his desk and picked up the notes on the cursed seal before sealing them away into his arm. Anko looked at him curiously. And that would be? She asked. Naruto looked at her, sizing her up. Tell her, Naruto-kun. It may help you to win her full trust if you show her some of your own. With a mental nod, Naruto spoke. Promise not to reveal where this is and what I'm working on to anyone. Even the Hokage? He asked. Enko was, once again, surprised by the boy. He really was secretive. Still, she could defend herself. He can't. She nodded. I promise on pain of death not to reveal it. She replied. Naruto nodded in appreciation. Sealing. He replied. Enko raised an eyebrow. Sealing is a difficult art. Not many shinobi find it useful, and most discredit it unless you're an acclaimed sealmaster like the Yondaime or Jiraiya of the Sannin. She said. Naruto nodded again. Exactly why I like it so much. No one knows what sealing is capable of, and very few, if any, shinobi have a defense against it. Besides that, I seem to have a knack for it. You know those people who have been getting pranked for a while now? He asked. After getting a confused nod from Anko, he explained. They're all people who treat me like shit, so I usually just develop a weird seal to screw with their business. One of the shop owners who refused to sell me kunai, I made a seal that converts some of the chakra in the air into electricity, so anyone who entered his store and tried to pick up his metal equipment got a light shock for about a week. Naruto said. Anko's mouth was hanging off her jaw. Gee Gaki, that's incredible. Do you have any idea how much someone would pay to have a seal like that in their vaults? She said. Naruto thought for a second before shrugging. Never thought about it honestly, but you do raise a good point. Maybe I should find someone to sell my seals so I can get out of that rat hole everyone calls my apartment. Naruto thought out loud. Anko looked at him sternly. What do you mean, rat hole? She asked, a little annoyed. Abuse on the streets was one thing, but she believed that everyone's home should be their safe area. Naruto shrugged. I've always lived there ever since I was kicked out of the orphanage when I was 4. He replied, dodging the question. Anko wanted to glare at him but sighed instead. Fine, fine. You don't have to answer me. She eyed him up and down before speaking again. You're in the academy, aren't you? She asked. Naruto nodded. Yes, but I am being sabotaged even with my mask of stupidity. I can't control my chakra as it is, and no one will teach me the proper taijutsu style. You know, it'd be easier to tell you the things they do teach me, which is pretty much the lectures on history and stuff. The practical I am usually thrown out of. He replied. Anko's blood was boiling. How dare they sabotage such an untapped resource? She thought. Just from this meeting alone, she could tell Naruto had immense potential, and she refused to let it go to waste on the bigots of the academy. They may be able to sabotage you, but that doesn't mean I can't help you. She said, smirking at the thought of training this diamond in the rough. Naruto smiled softly at his new friend, in his mind. You'd really do that? He asked. Anko nodded furiously. Hell yes. Geez kid, from your ki and sealing abilities alone you'd make a great shinobi. Ninjutsu isn't really applicable until Junin level. Genjutsu is more for those specialized in it. Taijutsu, Well, that's needed at every level, so that's what we will work on first. Chakra control will have to wait until I deem you at an acceptable taijutsu level, she replied. Naruto's smile threatened to split his face. That's fine. Thank you, Anko-chan. Oh, can we keep this from the old man? I wanna surprise him when I pass the exams, he said. In his mind, Naruto made a solemn vow to complete his curse seal removal soon so he could help his new teacher and friend. Anko thought about his request for a second before nodding. Very well. However, I expect you to pass those exams with flying colors, you understand me? She said with a serious tone but a smile on her face. Naruto nodded. Hi, he responded, happy that someone else was taking an interest in him. It seems that this was a good week for him. In his mind, Hikari was smirking up a storm and giggling perversely. Hopefully she becomes another one of Naruto-kun's lovers. She looks like she'd love to tease him mercilessly. Hey, I'm gonna have so much fun. Hikari thought. Time skip. 1 month. Anko was smiling broadly as she stepped into her dango stand to meet the girls. The girls hadn't been able to get together for the month after her near rape. As a matter of fact, they didn't even know about it, now that she thought about it. She shrugged mentally before noticing all her friends sitting at their usual table. Kurenai was the first to notice her, as always, because she was looking for her. They had been on alternating mission schedules, so they hadn't had much time to talk. Kurenai Yuahi was a black-haired, red-eyed kunoichi that wore a dress that looked like it was made of medical tape. She had a curvy figure, much like Anko's own, with lower D-cup and shapely legs. She had recently made Junin and was planning on taking a team from the graduating class this year. She had made a reputation of being ice-cold and earned the moniker, Ice Queen, of Konoha because she never went on dates with men. Hana Inuzuka was a brunette with slight red highlights and a rather feral look overall. She was more tame than most members of her clan but still more feral than regular. She was only 16 but she was a chunin with a solid D-cup size, slim hips, and a shapely rear. She wore the regular chunin vest with a forest green shirt underneath and spandex shorts that stopped mid-thigh. She was a veterinarian and she almost never went on dates. She turned down most guys because none met her standards. Yugao Azuki was another purple-haired woman who was also a kenjutsu master and an anbu. She had a perfect hourglass figure that all the girls were slightly jealous of with DD Cup. She had a boyfriend named Hayate Gecko who was also a kenjutsu master. She wore standard anbu pants, shirt, and sandals. She also happened to be one of the anbu that watched over Naruto and never shirked her duty. Anko quickly sat down and ordered an obscene amount of dango. She didn't drink any sake because of what nearly happened last time. Kurenai, being her best friend, noticed this and grew concerned. Anko-chan, are you okay? You never have dango without sake. Kurenai said. The other girls looked at the nervous Anko who replied, yeah, but I just didn't want sake today. The other girls gave her a skeptical look. Come on, Anko-chan, we all know you never have dango without your sake. What's the matter? Hana said, trying to get her friend to spill the beans. Anko looked nervous. She did not want to tell her friends that she had nearly been raped only to be saved by a boy, who she considered to be more of a man than 9/10 of the village, who she was now training. Well, I guess we could just tell Ibiki that you still sleep with a stuffed snake you affectionately call. Yugao never got to finish her sentence because Anko had covered her mouth before sighing. Fine. You win, she replied. She noticed the smirks on their faces before she opened her mouth again. Promise not to tell anyone? She asked. She received 3 nods as her answer. She sighed before she began telling the story from her point of view up until she passed out. So, I had a pretty shitty day and I decided that a drink was in order. I went to the nearby bar and proceeded to get stone-faced drunk. Unluckily for me, there were 6 jerks that just wanted to me, so they slipped a drug into one of my drinks. Kurenai glared at her friend. You know that men are always after you, more than normal anyways. Why would you let yourself get so drunk as to not notice? She asked. Anko frowned. I was having an off day, okay. Besides, I don't consider all men to want us as nothing more than breeding machines, unlike you. She replied. Before Kurenai could respond, Hannah interposed herself. Look, we aren't here for a philosophical debate on men. Anko-chan, please continue, she said. Kurenai was quiet. For now. Right, where was I? Oh yeah, so they drugged me and got me outside into the alleyway. They proceeded to take off my clothes and attempt to rape me. Anko said a little too calmly for the girls. She should have been a bit more broken up over it. Still, they kept quiet because they wanted to hear what happened. I say attempt because, before they could do anything else, they all shit themselves and ran off. I swear I was never more scared and relieved than I was before I passed out. The last thing I saw was a mop of blonde hair. Next thing I know, I wake up in a hotel room completely fine with a note saying to be more careful next time. She said, amending what really happened so her friends wouldn't go digging into it and found out it was Naruto-kun who saved her. So nothing bad really happened and you're still? Hannah said curiously. Nothing bad. Kurenai said a little louder than she meant to. She was almost raped and she was assaulted. This is why men are absolute pigs. Kurenai said with disgust. Yugao rolled her eyes. Give it a rest, will you? Not all men are pigs. Most, but not all. Besides, Anko came out of it fine and there was the person who saved her. She replied. Kurenai glared at Yugao. 99% of men are pigs and you know it. I bet the person who saved Anko-chan was a woman who couldn't stand to see the rape. She replied. Hannah sighed again. Not this again, please. Let's talk about something else. Has anyone seen anything funny lately? She asked, desperately trying to change the subject. Anko chuckled. Well, I saw an orange-clothed gaki turn a fruit stand into a fruit salad, if that counts as funny. She said. What could she say? She was proud of the gaki. He had taken to her training like a fish to water, scratch that like a sponge to water. He absorbed what she taught with a zeal that made Orochimaru seem tame in comparison. Not that she would ever compare him to that Tem. Naruto had come a long way from his brawler style when they started. He was able to take her snake style and change most of the basic katas to make his own style that he liked to call Uraken, meaning back fist. He mainly focused on dodging or blocking strikes and delivering devastating counterstrikes. He had a few offensive katas, but they were mostly basic ideas at this point. He was, by no standards, an expert, but he could pass for a mid-level genin, and she expected he could probably fight off a chunin if he was prepared with his seals. She had also been able to help him with his stealth and chakra control. He was able to do water walking rather well, but still needed to work on it. His stealth was easily Anbu level, as even she had trouble finding the blonde-haired nuisance when he really wanted to hide. When he changed into clothes that didn't make him a neon sign, he could probably infiltrate the Hokage Tower and get away with it. Back to the girls, they spent the rest of the afternoon chatting about different things like clothing trends, which Anko ignored of course, Naruto's pranks, which they all found amusingly enjoyable, and missions. They parted ways around 5 p.m. and Anko made her way to meet her unofficial student. She expected much out of him and hoped to see more progress soon. Time skip. 1 month, 2 months since Naruto met Anko. Naruto was in his lab when he suddenly jumped up and yelled, "Eureka, I did it!" In a very un-Naruto-like way. He started to dance around until he heard chuckling coming from his head. Congratulations, Naruto-kun. You have successfully completed the seal to remove Anko's blemish. Hikari said with a tone of mirth at her cantainers and mates' actions. He could act like such a child when he was excited. Naruto scratched the back of his head. He's sorry about that. But thank you. It would have taken another month without your help. He thought. He only got a mental blush from the praise before he started cleaning up his lab and thinking of ways to tell Anko about both Hikari and the seal. Hikari and Naruto chatted back and forth for an hour before deciding on a course of action. They didn't want to frighten their new friend and lose her help. They decided that telling her about Hikari first would be the best idea. She would probably overreact to the fact that he could remove her curse seal and not let up until he did it. Naruto nodded in acceptance of the plans they made and immediately set up the lab to remove her curse seal. There was no way they could do it anywhere else. It took him 2 hours to set up the seals and double-check everything to make sure it was in place. He wiped the sweat from his brow and nodded in appreciation of his hard work before turning to the clock and noticing it was 7 p.m. He only had half an hour to eat and meet with Anko for his nightly training session. He quickly showered and ate 3 cups of instant ramen before bolting out the door into the Forest of Death. Forest of Death. 7:32 p.m. Anko tapped her foot on the tree branch as she waited for her student. He was never late before and she was beginning to worry when she saw his orange clothes burst through the treeline outside the Forest of Death and proceed to hop over the fence. She smiled inwardly. She had really come to both respect and like the blonde ball of energy. Even if he was serious when they were alone, he was always happy to see her and train with her. It's nice to have someone appreciate me for once, she thought to herself as Naruto landed on the branch next to her. Naruto landed and smiled brightly at his friend, Sensei. She had taught him much in the past 2 months and he was deeply indebted to her. He decided to cut straight to the chase as he knew she did not like to beat around the bush. Anko-chan. Anko looked at him intently. I have something private I wish to speak with you about, so could we forego training tonight and head back to the lab? He asked. Anko raised an eyebrow and replied, I guess so Gaki, because you haven't missed any of our sessions yet and today was the only day you were late. What's so important that you want to be in the lab for it? She asked curiously. Naruto looked around before turning his back to her and readied himself to jump. The reason why I'm hated. He replied before jumping away, hoping that was enough to get her to follow him. Anko stood there for a second processing what he said before she sprung after him. Did someone tell him he was the Kyuubi? Oh god, I hope not. I'm gonna kill whoever told him. She thought as she increased her speed to try and catch the orange blur. Naruto's lab. 7:45 p.m. Naruto landed and immediately went inside before setting up the 2 chairs he had in the main room. The seal setup he planned to use was in one of the smaller rooms so Anko wouldn't see them too early. He sighed and tried to calm his nerves as Hikari whispered soothing promises from the back of his mind. He looked up as the door opened and Anko stepped in only to immediately sit down in the open chair and stare at him, obviously expecting an explanation. Naruto sighed again and looked Anko straight in the eyes. I hate to say this again, but I need your oath as a kunoichi and as a person that you will not reveal anything of what I say here today. If this information got into the hands of the civilian populace, I have no doubt that I would be killed almost instantaneously. He said seriously. Anko's brain was in overdrive. The last time he had only come off with half his secrets. It seems like he trusted her enough to tell her all of them now. That one thought made her nod her head in acceptance. No one else had trusted her with all of their secrets. I swear an oath on my pride as a kunoichi and a woman that I shall not reveal what you tell me here. She replied seriously. Naruto smiled at her. Thank you Anko-chan. I promise you will be happy by the end of this discussion. He said, confusing her. Why would she be happy? Please do not interrupt me until I am finished with telling you my story, okay? He asked. She nodded, so he continued. 2 months ago I met you, but I also met the Kyuubi no Kitsune 2 days before that. Let me start out by saying that she is not what everyone makes her out to be. Yes, Kyuubi is a she and her name is Hikari. Anko's jaw dropped before she suddenly pumped her fist in the air. Hell yeah, another one for the girls. She yelled enthusiastically. Naruto groaned as Hikari spoke up. I knew there was a reason I like her. Tehi. Hikari mentioned. Yes, yes. Anyways, I was being beaten by a mob on my birthday and I was eventually knocked unconscious. I met up with Hikari-chan who was throwing herself against the seal trying to get out to help me. That got an appreciative and surprised look from Anko, a rather funny sight actually, and a mental blush from Hikari. We talked for a while before I agreed to sign a contract with her that stated she would give me a bloodline and, in return, I would be able to give her a body and chakra outside of my body from time to time. Well, that and I am officially her mate, but that's just bonus. He said with a smile at the end. Anko took a moment to take her jaw off the floor and shook her head. Only you, Gaki. I'll trust you with Hikari, for now, but could I meet her? She replied. Hikari smirked in his mind as Naruto nodded and he molded her body next to him. As soon as she was formed, she moved behind him and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her assets against the back of his head. Hello Anko-chan. I am Hikari, the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Thank you for taking care of Naruto-kun for me. I can only do so much, she said. Anko's mind went blank for a second before it rebooted and reminded her about Hikari being mated to Naruto, so she ignored her blatant and said, let's just get one thing straight, I'll trust you because the Gaki trusts you. But, he pulled out a kunai and started playing with it. You heard him and not even Kami could keep you safe from me. She said seriously. Hikari chuckled, I won't hurt him. I am making a few cosmetic changes though. Naruto-kun agreed with it all beforehand, so it's far game. She said. Anko nodded and put her kunai away. Naruto sighed and said, since you're fine with that, I have another bombshell for you. Anko gave him her full attention. He took a deep breath and said, I can remove your curse seal. Time seemed to stop for Anko. Not even Jiraiya could remove the damn thing, and Naruto was telling her that he could remove it. It shouldn't be possible, and yet, she had seen some of his seals and she knew he was serious when he said he had a knack for them. Her eyes hardened as she glared at Naruto. Gaki, if you're messing with me, not even Kyuubi could help you. She said coldly. Naruto flinched slightly. I'm not lying. I have everything set up and was going to remove it for you whether you kept my secrets or not. He responded. Anko looked into his eyes and didn't see any deception. For almost 5 minutes, they stared at one another until Anko spoke again. Gaki, you remove this seal and I am your bitch for life. You want to me every day for the rest of my life, fine. You wanna get a group of your friends and me, I'll do it all with a smile on my face. Hell, you can cut off my tits for all I care. Just remove this damn seal. She said, yelling at the end. Her eyes had tears in them as she desperately wanted to be rid of this stain on her soul. Naruto opened his mouth to respond that she didn't have to do that when Hikari forced it closed. He looked at her curiously, as did Anko before she wagged her finger at Naruto. She knew what he was going to say and she wouldn't allow it. She walked over to Anko and said, stand up. Anko was confused but did as she said. Hikari circled Anko slowly, touching her and testing her body like one would a piece of fine meat before she nodded in acceptance. She had only seen Anko's body, she wanted to test it first before she put her plan into action. She smirked as she leant in and whispered hotly into Anko's ear. You made a good offer right there and I intend to make you live up to it. As a little incentive, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing to his body for the future. Anko's eyes were fluttering as she felt the hot breath on her neck and ear. He's already got stamina in spades, so that's an easy one. I've already increased his sperm count, so, when he's grown, he'll be able to cum buckets easily. I'm making sure his body will be supremely flexible for both combat and the activities in the bedroom. Already, Anko was having trouble hiding her increasing arousal, but the best was soon to come, the last and most important thing I'm doing. He's going to be hung like a horse. She said horse with a very lustful tone, sending shivers up Anko's spine and sending her mind straight into the gutter. By the time I'm done, he's going to be at least 8.5 to 9 inches long and 3 inches wide. Hikari said, finishing her explanation and giving Anko a very welcome nosebleed. Think you can handle that? Receiving a nod from the purple-haired woman, she smiled. Good. She stepped back to Naruto and said, Naruto-kun, accept her generous offer. Naruto looked at Hikari like she was nuts. I don't want her to be a slave, he started to say until Hikari cut him off, seeing as Anko was still daydreaming. Look, she wants to do it, besides, you're probably going to be under that CRA thing anyways. Better with girls you know and trust, maybe love someday, than some hussy that will leave at the first sign of trouble, right? Hikari said. Anko came around by this time and was nodding with Hikari's words. Naruto looked a bit unsure and was about to decline when Anko crossed the room and grabbed Naruto before full-on kissing him. Naruto melted into the kiss as Anko gently probed his mouth. They broke for air, panting as Anko looked at Naruto. That good enough for ya? She said. Naruto nodded dumbly. Good, let's go get this seal off, she said as she dropped Naruto and turned to head out of the room. Hikari stepped up to Anko and put a firm hand on her shoulder. That was his first kiss. You won that, but I'm the one who gets to take his virginity, got it? She said, too sweetly to be real. Anko nodded nervously and Hikari smiled brightly. Great. I know we will get along just fine, Anko-chan, she said as she wrapped her arm around Anko's shoulder and led her to the room where the unsealing would take place. Naruto struggled up with a dazed look on his face before it split into a goofy grin. If that's what a kiss feels like. Damn, I'm glad I got two beautiful women to do that with. And, according to the CRA, I'm gonna need more. Hehehehehe, he thought as he headed for the sealing room. No, he will not be an open pervert, only for his girls. Sealing room. 8:45 p.m. Naruto stood behind Anko, who had her shirt and trench coat off, as he painted the seal onto her back and over the curse seal. He took his time to ensure that every piece of the seal was perfect and in place. He double-checked and triple-checked the seal on her while Hikari checked the seals he had set up beforehand. Hikari gave him the sign that everything was okay and then disappeared back into her cage so she could complete her part of the unsealing. Naruto had set up an amalgamation of seals. One seal purged the strange chemical that allowed the seal to change the user's mind and body. Another would actually reverse the damages made by the seal. This could not be used for medical reasons because it was specifically made to counteract the chemical compound. Yet another would expel Orochimaru's soul from the seal so that the user's body could, once again, reach its full potential. The last one, made specifically for this night, redirected that piece of Orochimaru's soul into the seal on Naruto's stomach so Hikari could have some fun with the bastard. Naruto nodded as he took his place in the sealing circle. He looked towards Anko, who nodded. Alright, this is going to hurt a lot. Please bear through it, he said. She nodded and pulled out a strip of leather before biting into it. Naruto nodded once more before running through a few activation hand seals and saying, Fuin Hakai. Seal destruction, and slamming his hands onto the seal. Anko felt like every cell in her body was being lit on fire only to be doused and then reset on fire again. It hurt worse than when the seal was first applied. She screamed into the leather strip until her throat was raw and she was heaving for breath before it finally ended. It had felt like hours but, in reality, only took about 2 minutes. She collapsed heaving for breath and was able to turn her head to see Naruto smile warmly at her before she blacked out with a smile on her face. Naruto smiled at Anko and it just intensified as he heard Hikari start tearing into the soul piece that was being utterly destroyed in his mindscape. He got up and slowly walked over to Anko before half-dragging her to the bed in the lab and setting the alarm for 8 a.m. He had miscalculated the chakra needed to destroy the seal and had ended up using nearly all of his Junin-level chakra to destroy it. He sighed as he laid down on the floor next to the futon. The next thing he knew, he was inside of Anko's arms as she crushed him to her body. He blushed but promptly passed out from not having any chakra. Hikari giggled in his mind but didn't wake her container. It would be funny to see their reaction in the morning. Naruto's lab. 8 a.m. Naruto awoke to find himself in a very comfortable position. His head was being pushed into the generous cleavage of one Anko Mitarashi. He also noted that he had one of the most restful sleeps of his life. He sighed as he slowly got out of bed and went to make a real breakfast. He had started to henjin buy regular food ever since 2 months ago, but he still loved ramen. He spent a good 15 minutes making a breakfast of eggs and toast before he calmly poured 2 glasses of orange juice and bringing them to the study bedroom. He walked in only to see Anko smirking at him. "You know, usually, I'd kill a man for being in my," she said nonchalantly. Naruto started sweating even as he put the breakfast in front of her on a tray. "Good start," she said before she started laughing at the look of complete terror on his face. "Calm down, Naruto-kun. After all, I kissed you yesterday and you removed my seal as promised." She smiled softly at him before it turned into a smirk. "If you want to touch them, all you have to do is ask, Naruto-sama," she said lustfully. Naruto promptly turned a shade of red to make Hinata jealous and began to shovel in his food. "Oh yeah, we are gonna get along just fine, Anko-chan," Hikari said as she laughed in Naruto's mind. "Stupid perverted girls," Naruto thought, still blushing, causing Hikari to laugh even harder. Suddenly, Naruto remembered something. "Anko-chan, I know you probably want to go run and tell everyone you're free of your seal, but can I ask you to wait off on that until I'm a genin? If the civilians knew I had access to Orotem's notes." He let the answer trail. Anko sighed. "Yes, that's fine. I swear those civilians need to die because all these secrets you have to keep are stupid. You shouldn't have to hide for fear of retribution for something you do exceptionally well," she said with a frown. Naruto nodded in agreement. "I know what you mean. I'm sad I have to hide it, but once I'm a genin, it won't matter because I'll be under the old man. Not to mention I'll be considered a legal adult," he said. Anko smiled. "I can't wait for that day, Naruto-kun." She looked at the clock and noticed it was about 9 a.m. "Shit. I've got an interrogation at 9:15. Sorry, but I've gotta go, Naruto-kun. I'll see you for training tonight." She got up and threw her shirt and trench coat on. She wavered for a second before kissing Naruto goodbye on the cheek and dashing out of the door. Naruto's face split into a goofy grin again as he cleaned up the breakfast dishes. Naruto was walking to the academy smiling in his mask like normal. Still, he was actually happy for once. Today were the genin exams and the first time he would drop his mask around his classmates. He was still wearing his orange jumpsuit, but he would soon change out of that when he passed the exam. He was going to really show his abilities when the time came. He could fight off a decent chunin now. His resistance seal was at level 4 and, when removed, would let him be about as fast as a high-level junin. Granted, he couldn't fight at that level just yet, but he was making steady progress. His seals were ingenious and he smiled as he remembered all the work he had done in making sure he could make the seals in midair with his finger. It had taken him a good month of pure chakra control to let it happen, but it was combat ready. His ninjutsu consisted of Kage Bunshin and Shunshin, those being the only ninjutsu that Hikari could teach him and Anko wasn't allowed to teach him legally, so he never asked to ensure that their relationship remained a secret. That didn't mean that, when they were alone, she didn't tease him mercilessly, with Hikari happily aiding her in making the blonde-haired boy blush like mad. They loved to creep up behind him while he was working on a seal and snuggle his head into there, trying to make him guess which girl was holding him. Surprisingly, he got it right 90% of the time. He sighed as he walked into the academy. Hikari had asked to leave the seal for about a month 3 weeks ago. For some reason she refused to tell him, claiming that it was a secret. He had a quest when she had kissed him silly. Still, he was worried about her. They had been together since his birth and he felt empty without her around. He had grown used to her advice and suggestions and was missing it terribly. Enko was good for ninjutsu and taijutsu, but seals were beyond her. She had kept her promise not to show her destroyed curse seal to her friends, but that would be null and void come tomorrow. He walked into the classroom and sat down at his desk. He noticed the blush on Hinata's face. Thanks to his girl's constant teasing, he now knew that she liked him. Too bad her image of him would shatter soon enough. He sighed and leaned back in his chair waiting for his Sakura-chan to come in. He would need to keep up his act around the students except when he acutally took the tests. He was pretty sure that Shikamaru and, maybe, Shino would pick up on the change, but he doubted anyone else would. He noticed that the room filled up and Sasuke sitting in the chair next to him, making him mentally curse up a storm. Damn Uchiha. He knows that Sakura and Ino are gonna kick me out of this seat. Naruto thought as he heard rumbling coming from outside the academy and, then, down the halls. Akamaru whimpered and ducked into the hoodie that Kiba was wearing, while covering his ears. Kiba's eyes widened and he yelled, "Hit the deck!" before he dove under his desk and covered his ears much like his canine friend. Suddenly the door burst open and two girls were standing in the doorway. Unless I say otherwise, all characters have their pre-Shippuden outfits. Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka were both stuck in the doorframe glaring at one another heatedly while screaming at the top of their lungs about fighting for their Sasuke-kun. Naruto mentally rolled his eyes and prepared for his grandiose performance of liking the pink-haired banshee. Honestly, he couldn't stand her and had only picked her because he knew she would refuse him constantly and would not create trouble with the villagers, thinking the demon brat had a girlfriend. Enko and Hikari don't count, they're too strong to fall to such ignorant bigots. Naruto smiled as they tumbled into the room and quickly got up to help his Sakura-chan to her feet. "Let me help you, Sakura-chan," Naruto said loudly as he rushed down the stairs and purposefully tripped and collided into the swirling mass of limbs that was Ino and Sakura. That earned him a double punch, one from Ino and one from Sakura. "I don't need your help, Dobi," Sakura said rudely and quickly stalked off to continue arguing with Ino about seating arrangements around the Uchiha. Naruto just kept his mask up and stood up before making his way to a nearby seat. Iruka and Mizuki walked in not even a minute later, and Iruka used his patented big head no jutsu to shut everyone up. "Good, now, we will begin the genin examinations. The first part is a written test on aspects of a shinobi's life and history of Konoha. The second part is a taijutsu spar between either myself or Mizuki-sensei, in which you must last at least 3 minutes or land a decisive blow. The third part is a weapons accuracy test in which you must throw 10 shuriken and 10 kunai at varying targets with more points for distance and accuracy. The final part will be a showing of the 3 academy jutsus in order to show you are proficient in its use. If everyone will remain quiet, we can begin," Iruka said as he passed Naruto a paper. He never noticed the scowl on Mizuki's face as he did so. Hokage's office. Same time. Many aspiring Junin sensei were gathered in the Hokage's office to view their potential students. Enko Mitarashi, Kakashi Hatake, Kurenai Yuhi, and Asuma Sarutobi, just to name a few, were watching with some interest, although Kakashi was still reading his book. Enko was watching because Naruto was there and she could notice that he was blazing through the test like it was a bowl of ramen. Kakashi was watching the last Uchiha, as ordered by the stuck-up civilian council, not that he minded watching over someone he believed was his responsibility. Kurenai was paying special attention to the Hyuga heiress and Asuma was mostly eyeing Kurenai with a few peeks at Shikamaru. Sarutobi cleared his throat, gaining the people's attention. "You are all here today to observe the graduating class at the academy. I hope you can all make wise choices in your teams this year," he said before returning to spying on the students. Academy. Taijutsu tests. Naruto was sure he had aced the test, although he kept up his act and took the full time allotted for the test. Now they were moving on to something Naruto was sure wouldn't be a problem, if he didn't get Mizuki. He was not blind to the subterfuge and tricks to make his stance or skills worse throughout the year. He could also tell that Mizuki had something sinister planned because he kept eyeing Naruto like he was the Forbidden Scroll or something. They went down the list of applicants and Naruto sighed at the horrendous display that the civilian kids, not to mention shudders, the fangirls, put on during their turns. The shinobi kids were a different story, for the most part. Choji thoroughly won his match with a hit on Iruka at 2 minutes and 48 seconds. Kiba did slightly better at 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Shikamaru, surprisingly, lasted the 3 minutes as did Ino and Sakura. Hinata was too timid to outright attack Mizuki, so she lasted the full 3 minutes without a single hit on her. Shino lasted the 3 minutes, but that was more due to his family style which revolved around dodging and blocking instead of attacking. Naruto counted the remaining students and mentally cursed. Sasuke was next and it was Iruka's turn, that meant Mizuki would be Naruto's sparring partner. He sighed as he watched Sasuke get a hit on Iruka after 1 minute and 37 seconds. Great. My turn with Mizuki Tem. Naruto thought bitterly. He ran out to the field and turned around to smile at Sakura. Hey Sakura-chan, watch me. He yelled, only getting a glare in response. Mizuki smirked at Naruto, thinking of the ways to make him fail. Naruto nodded to him before slipping into his own personal style, the Irukan backfist style. Mizuki's eyes widened a bit before his grin grew. If the demon is trying a new taijutsu style out, he'll be even easier pickings than before. Mizuki thought as he started the spar and ran full bore at Naruto. Naruto smirked and began to move around Mizuki's hits like they were nothing. The class was stunned. It had been nearly a minute and even Iruka was staring in shock. Mizuki was obviously going full out and he still couldn't touch Naruto. Naruto, from his perspective, was disappointed. This is the caliber of a Chunin of Konoha. He thought. Mizuki's taijutsu was high genin at best, and this was supposed to be his best area. He was sorely missing his training with Anko right now. 2 minutes later and Iruka finally called the match, saying that the time limit was up. Mizuki stopped, but he was panting hard while Naruto looked only slightly winded. Most of the students figured that Mizuki went easy on him while only 3 believed differently. Ia Alwa Ays knew why you were street strong, Naruto-kun. Hinata thought while blushing. His grades do not reflect accurately on this performance. Mizuki-san was not holding back and Naruto-san looks barely troubled. I should have suspected this outcome considering my new hive. Shino thought as he reflected on the new colony he had received via Naruto Uzumaki. Hold your horses folks, this will be explained later. This is too troublesome to think about, but Naruto is stronger than he seems. Shikamaru thought before going back to watching the clouds. Naruto walked off and yelled something obnoxious, causing many to reaffirm that the Dobi got lucky. Naruto simply cackled in his mind and looked into the air before shooting a thumbs up and a smile. The intended recipient, Anko, chuckled in the Hokage office. So he knows we are watching The kunoichi thought and checked the surroundings. It seems no one else noticed. Back with Naruto, he lined up for the accuracy test and stayed mostly silent while keeping up his happy and innocent Dobi mask. He, again, mentally sighed at the poor scores from the civilian kids, most who joined for either glory or the Uchiha, mostly girls. Naruto paid attention when the clan heirs and Sakura, whom he cheered for, took their tests. However, Shikamaru scored a 6 on both, the minimum to pass. Same case with Choji and Kiba. Hinata was 7/10 for kunai and 6/10 for shuriken. Ino and Sakura both barely passed with a 6 on both. Shino, however, got a 9 on the kunai and a 7 on the shuriken. When Sasuke stepped up and received his kunai and shuriken, Naruto noticed that it was one of the best sets around. He scowled mentally and scoffed as he watched the Uchiha smirk and show off. He threw 5 of the shuriken wide and then threw the last 5 with such force that he altered all of their paths right into the bullseye. That got a squeal from the fangirls and a grumble from Choji and Kiba. Sasuke picked up the kunai and threw them one by one, but he only got a 9/10 on that. He turned around and smirked confidently before heading off to brood on his own. It was Naruto's turn and he wasn't in the mood to show off any more of his abilities, his taijutsu being showcased already. He grabbed the shuriken and, one by one, hit the bullseye on the farthest ones, scoring a perfect 10 out of 10. As the class went silent and Iruka congratulated Naruto, he picked up the kunais and proceeded to repeat this act. Another 10 out of 10 for the